Hi guys. Before we proceed to this video, we've got something very important to share with you. Neoliberalism, Inequality and Authoritarianism by Professor Jon V. Kofas is available for purchase. You can order it directly from the publisher Little French eBooks or through Amazon.
Hello everyone, welcome to a session on the European relationship with Israel and the recent developments regarding the position of the key European states, namely Germany, the United Kingdom, and France, with regard to Israel. Europe has a long-standing history of supporting the state of Israel since 1948. Obviously, the Suez Canal situation in 1956 was an aberration during the Eisenhower presidency, but the Europeans have essentially been the junior partners of the United States historically in diplomatic circles and have followed the lead of the United States in the Middle East. It is important to note that the Europeans were blindly following the Biden administration's policy toward the Middle East, which came during the war, the proxy war of NATO, as of course the Kremlin, among others, call it, the war that started in 2022 between Ukraine and Russia. And so the Europeans had been very loyal to Israel. And perhaps one could argue that they followed the same pattern of a military solution path as they did in Ukraine. What has changed since January 20th, when Donald Trump was sworn into office for his second term, are several things. First of all, the rather harsh policy that the Trump administration adopted toward the Europeans, regardless of country, doesn't matter whether it was the UK, Germany, France, in terms of pursuing a unilateral path to the issue of a diplomatic solution toward Ukraine, basically pursuing a bilateral relationship with Russia, not including the Europeans, although expecting the Europeans to continue to pay, and they had paid quite a bit throughout the duration of the Russia-Ukraine war, which is ongoing, by the way. Yet they were excluded from the decision-making process in the on the path to a diplomatic solution, I should say, because there is no diplomatic solution, contrary to the boasting of the Trump administration that the administration would end that war within a very short period of time. Another factor that accounts for the reservations of the Europeans with regard to Israel from January to the present, this is early June 2025, is the fact that the Trump administration unleashed a tariff war, economic nationalism that the Europeans obviously felt very strongly was unfair. That came on the heels of a European economy that is in worse shape, actually, than the U.S. economy, as a result, in large part, because the Europeans, freely, of course, decided to follow the path of the United States in the Ukrainian war and to impose sanctions on Russia, and that backfired. And the inflationary pressures on the economy resulted in rising socioeconomic gap throughout Europe and rising unpopularity of the war in Ukraine. So there is a gap between what the governments were doing throughout the execution of the war in Ukraine and Russia, between what the governments were doing, that is blind support for Ukraine, versus what the people wanted and how they were suffering through it, paying the economic price, especially in energy, which fuels inflationary pressures across the board. Another dimension was that is very important for Europe, is that the Trump administration demanded and continues to demand that yesterday there was a NATO meeting, and the United States Secretary of Defense made it very clear that the United States expects all of Europe to raise its share of defense spending from 3 to 5%. So more resources diverted from the civilian economy, already weak, already burdening the working class and the middle class all across Europe, by the way, including Germany. Germany, which has the biggest economy in Europe, but also France and the United Kingdom. Also, France and the United Kingdom, those countries are not doing well either. So that is another dimension. All of these, combined with the fact that the United States pursues under Trump has pursued a two-tiered policy with regard to these major wars. One in Ukraine, where the U.S. has argued that it wants a diplomatic solution to this, without having the Europeans included in the process. By the way, only through consultations informally. The other, of course, is in the Middle East, where the forever war doctrine is alive and well. And in fact, throughout April, the United States was involved in escalating the situation in the Middle East while negotiating with Iran for a nuclear deal, it launched a war against Yemen. Specifically, the U.S. argued it was against the Houthi rebels, who are ideologically linked to the government of Iran. So that is another dimension of it. The Europeans have proved that they are scaling back. Some countries, especially Spain, Holland, and of late France, have expressed serious reservation. Ireland, I forgot Ireland. Ireland have expressed serious reservations about support for Israel, considering that the genocide war, as the ruling of the ICC, the International Criminal Court, which issued arrest warrants for Netanyahu and the former defense minister as war criminals, considering that, the Europeans have had second thoughts. Now, on June 4th, the UN Security Council passed a resolution 14-1. 14 members of the permanent and the rotating members voted in favor of the resolution for the immediate ceasefire and humanitarian aid to Gaza. One member of the Security Council, the United States, voted against the resolution. It vetoed the resolution, arguing that it just wasn't good enough because it didn't call for the elimination of Hamas and so forth. Arguments we have seen in the last couple of years. This is nothing new. On the same day, June 4th, the State Department issued sanctions against 4 judges on the International Criminal Court, the ICC, for their role, for 2 reasons. One, their role in issuing a warrant for Prime Minister Netanyahu and his former defense minister as war criminals. And the other reason the ICC continues to have an interest into the U.S. Uh, war crimes question during the execution of the 20-year war in Afghanistan. This was the reason that the State Department issued sanctions against 4 judges. On June 4th, just by coincidence, Human Rights Watch, the international human rights organization known worldwide, concluded in a report, these are all things that happened on June 4th. UN Security Council, State Department sanctions of ICC, and Human Rights Watch concluded that the United States had committed war crimes in Yemen. And specifically on 17th of April 2024, according to Human Rights Watch report, when the U.S. targeted civilians in Ras Isa port in Yemen. The Human Rights Watch report maintains that although the claims of the United States government were that it was after Houthi rebels, the victims were civilians at the port. And this is another dimension of the U.S. going after ICC justices. Now, Europe, there is speculation on the part of scholars and journalists and analysts who watch events in the Middle East, who argue that Europe has a long-standing record, and it's true, of supporting Israel right behind the United States, especially, by the way, the United Kingdom, which, to its credit, it voted for ceasefire in Gaza on the 4th of June in the Security Council, as well as Germany, which has a special relationship because Germany, of course, the country during the Third Reich, guilty for the Holocaust, the Jewish Holocaust. There is a change in the climate in France, in Germany, in the UK, and all across Europe, with the exception of Hungary, by the way, which is the most ardent supporter of Israel. When we look at international public opinion polls, the fact is, the Pew Research Center, for example, polls, it shows that the European people are not siding with Israel. On the contrary, they are decidedly on the side of the Palestinians. They are not on the side of Israel. And they are not against the ICC, as the US and Israel have argued that it's the villain because it issued the warrants for war crimes against Israeli officials. They want to see justice, and above all, they want to see peace, end of apartheid, end of ethnic cleansing in the Palestinian lands. There are the apologists of Israel who argue that the Western press pays too much attention to the war in Israel, while there are something like 120 at any one time, from very small conflicts to larger ones, 120 in the world right now. That could very well be. That's what some pro-Israeli elements argue. That does not diminish the validity of what the United Nations rapporteurs, as well as the ICC and the ICJ, the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court, have concluded regarding the war in Gaza. It doesn't diminish that. It doesn't make it go away. Just whether the media focuses on Israel or not, it's irrelevant. Actually, the media focuses more on Ukraine, the Western media, than it does on Israel. While that war in Israel is continuing, there is in the longer video that I invite you to take a look at, there is a great deal of material about where Europe is going. There are there are those who are skeptical, arguing that this is all show, that the European governments are just doing this for political reasons, because they want to retain popular support, and that they're really behind Israel because there are European companies that have been making billions over the years supporting Israel, and that is true. From banks to defense contractors, it's true. Italy is one of those countries, but also German companies, French companies, United Kingdom companies. Of course, that is true. Um, the question, of course, is to what degree is the European climate among governments changed? Has it changed? Is it the same as it was during Biden? And the answer is not. There are substantive changes. And this is what I discuss in the longer analytical video, which I invite you to watch. And I ask you to tune in for that, and also to write questions, write comments, ask questions on this material as well, and to become members of this educational channel. Thank you very much.